The door of the waystation blew open so hard it cracked against the stone wall, and the woman who stepped through it was not asking permission. Noah Doyle had been kneeling by the hearth, coaxing a fire out of wet tinder with patient, unhurried hands when the storm hurled her inside. He looked up. His breath simply stopped. She was tall, a head and a half above any man he had met in his 30 years, with the broad, powerful build of her kind, and a face that stopped every thought in his skull. Her skin was a deep, storm-gray green, smooth and striking, and her tusks curved up from a full lower lip in two elegant arcs that caught the firelight like polished horn. Her hair was black as river-bottom silt, braided back in a thick rope that had mostly come loose in the wind, wild strands whipping around a face that was hard and proud and fiercely, unmistakably beautiful. She wore snug, dark travel leathers, a fitted bodice laced tightly across a powerful torso, close-cut riding breeches tucked into knee-high boots, and a short fur-lined cloak that had gone stiff with ice at the hem. The leathers moved with her like a second skin. She was snow-dusted, blade-armed at both hips, and she looked at him the way a hawk looks at the landscape below, assessing, unhurried, afraid of nothing. Behind her, the pass roared. Drifts were already cutting off the lower road, and the temperature was dropping fast enough that Noah had been wondering if the waystation walls would hold. Now he had other things to wonder about. He rose to his feet slowly. "The door," he said. She turned, pulled it shut with one hand, and dropped the crossbar. The howling dimmed to a manageable moan. "There is only one room," he said carefully. She was scanning the space as he spoke. The two stone bunks along the east wall, the single fireplace, the shelf of emergency rations the mountain wardens kept stocked, the bucket of sand, the iron hook where his own pack hung. He watched her catalog everything in about 4 seconds. "I can see that," she said. Her voice was lower than he expected, rough at the edges like the sound of boots on gravel, and perfectly calm. "One fire, one supply of wood. You are human. You will die of cold faster than I will. That is a polite way to offer to let me stay near the fire. I was stating facts. Draw your own conclusions." Her accent had the mountain clan lilt to it, consonants hard and precise. He had heard it before once, on a caravan road where he had worked for 3 months as a hired walker, carrying supplies up to the high fortresses. He had heard orc women speaking to each other across the supply depot, and it had sounded like that same weight, that same precision, no sound wasted. He said, "Noah Doyle. I was a lay brother at the cloister of the Grey Warden for 6 years. Now I walk the high roads, keeping the waystation stocked for the warden post at Keen's Fold." He crossed to his pack and pulled out the Iron Warden's medallion, held it up so she could see it. "I am not a threat to you." She looked at the medallion, then at him. "I did not think you were," she said, and sat down on the nearest bunk without being invited, unlacing one boot with methodical fingers. "Zora Ashwalker, Clan Ashwalker. I am a courier running dispatches from Surathkal to the fortress at the top of this pass." She paused, was running. "The pass is closed until morning." "The pass may be closed for 2 days, Noah said. "There is a second storm behind the first. I spotted the cloud wall from the lower ridge about 2 hours ago." She stopped unlacing, looked at him. "You are certain?" "I have been walking these roads for 3 years. I am certain." She absorbed this without drama. Finished removing the boot, set it neatly beside the bunk, and began on the second. "Then we share the station until it passes," she said. "I will not bother you if you do not bother me." He went back to the fire. "Deal," he said, and bent to the tinder again. The logs caught after another few minutes of careful work. He fed them with the slow, almost meditative patience that 6 years in the cloister had built into his bones, never rushing, never forcing the thing. When the fire was strong, he put the tin kettle on the hook and filled it from the melted snow bucket. He heard her settle behind him, heard the dry rustle of her cloak, the soft sounds of someone methodically inspecting their own gear for damage. He did not look at her again until the tea was ready and he had 2 cups. He turned and found her watching him. He crossed and held one out. "Mountainwort and dried clove. It is not much." She took it. Their fingers did not touch, but he was aware of how large her hand was, the knuckles heavy and scarred. A courier, she had said, but she had a warrior's hands. He had known lay brothers who could read hands. He wondered what hers said. "You are not afraid of me," she said. It came out almost like an observation she was testing rather than a statement of fact. "No," he agreed. "Most humans in a one-room waystation in a snowstorm would be. I am aware." Why not? He considered the question honestly, the way the old abbot had always insisted one should. He said, "Because you came in out of a blizzard and the first thing you did was close the door to keep the cold from killing us both. That tells me something about you." She looked at him over the edge of the cup. Something moved in her eyes, not warmth exactly, but the first tentative shift of something that had been held very still. She said nothing. She drank the tea. That was the first night. The storm lasted nearly 3 days in the end. Noah had been right about the second wall of weather rolling in behind the first. By mid-morning of the second day, the drifts outside the waystation's narrow windows were level with the sills, and the world had been reduced to the sound of wind, the snap of the fire, and the two of them moving in careful orbit around each other in the single room. He was used to close quarters. The cloister had been full of men sharing dormitory cells, sharing meals in silence, sharing the rhythms of prayer and work and study in a compact stone world. He knew how to occupy space without crowding it. He suspected, from the way she moved, always aware of where he was, always leaving a precise gap, that she knew too. They fell into a pattern by the second morning without discussing it. He managed the fire, keeping it burning steadily without wasting wood, rationing from the station's supply with the same care he applied to everything. She managed the rations, sorting through the station's emergency shelf with a logistics mind that was clearly professional. This much for 2 people for 3 days, with this reserve in case the storm stretched longer, these items first since they were oldest. She laid it out in front of him like a briefing, and he approved all of it without argument, because she was right. "You are sensible," she said, as if surprised. "Were you expecting otherwise? Most men argue with me about supply counts. It is territorial, I think. The numbers offend them less than the fact that I ran them." "I was a lay brother," he said. "We did not get territorial about supply counts. We got territorial about who stole the good quill pens." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Cloister, you mentioned this before. You left. 6 years ago I entered. 4 years ago I left." He was cutting dried meat into portions while he spoke, keeping his hands busy the way he always did when talking about the cloister. "I was not built for a life of enclosure. I believe what the wardens believe, that the roads should be kept open, that travelers should be sheltered, that the world's high places deserve care. I just found I needed to live those things outside a wall rather than inside one. So you walk the roads alone." "Yes. For how long?" "Going on 3 years. That is a long time alone." He did not answer immediately. Outside, the wind drove something hard against the stone and rattled the door in its frame. He said, "It is." She was quiet then. He could feel her thinking, the way you can feel weather building before it arrives, some shift in the atmosphere of the room. Then she said, "Clan Ashwalker lost most of its trade routes 2 seasons ago. The plague from the eastern lowlands. Humans quarantined every road that came near our territories, and they were not careful about distinguishing a quarantine from a siege." She said it without emotion, which made it somehow heavier. "So I run dispatches now, clan to clan, over the high passes where the human quarantine patrols don't bother to climb." He looked up. "Is the plague still in the lowlands?" "Famine now, mostly. When a plague burns through fast enough, what it leaves behind is empty fields and not enough hands to work them. The lowland towns are hungry and scared, which makes them cruel," he said. She met his eyes. "Yes. I know," he said quietly. He set down the knife. "I came through Hethwick about 2 months ago. They had turned away a whole family of half-bloods because they thought the gray in the children's skin meant plague. The children were not sick. They were just themselves." He stopped. "I stayed 2 weeks and helped the local warden talk the town down from the worst of it, but I cannot stay everywhere." "No," she said. "No one can." They looked at each other across the small, fire-warmed room, and something settled between them that had nothing to do with the storm. A recognition. Two people who had each, in their own way, been living at the edge of a world that was frightened and contracting, trying to hold some part of it open. He picked up the knife again. "Tell me about Zora Ashwalker," he said. "I have never been that far east." And she did. She talked about the Eastern Territories with the quiet authority of someone who loved a place but never assumed you would understand why. She made him understand. The way the eastern ridgelines caught the morning light in autumn. The salt flats at Call's Base that the clan children used as a racing ground. The market at the crossroads below the fortress where orc and human traders had, for 40 years, conducted a wary and mutually profitable commerce that the plague had now shuttered. He listened. He was, the old abbot had once told him, the best listener in the cloister, which was also why he would eventually have to leave it. People who could truly listen needed to be somewhere there were people to hear. He listened to Zora Ashwalker describe her world, and he heard every word, asked questions when they were genuine, stayed silent when silence was what the story needed. He watched her hands move as she spoke, and he watched the guard around her, which had been formidable at the start, begin, not to drop, but to ease. The way a shoulder eases when a weight is redistributed. By the second night, she had moved her bunk slightly closer to the fire. Not closer to him exactly. Just closer. He did not say anything about it. He woke on the third morning to find the storm had broken. Blue winter light came through the high window slits, clean and hard and clear. He lay still for a moment, listening to the new silence, and then he turned his head and found her sitting on the edge of her bunk, already awake, watching the light move on the ceiling. Her braid had come entirely undone at some point in the night. Her black hair lay loose over her shoulders, and she was very still in the way of someone who is thinking deeply about something they have not yet decided. He sat up. "It is done," he said. "Yes." She did not move. "You will need to get the dispatches to the fortress." "Yes." "The road up will be slow. Another 2-3 hours depending on the drifts." "I know the road." She still had not moved. He watched her, and he had the sense that she was struggling with something, and that the struggle was not something she did often. She was a woman accustomed to decision, and something was making decision difficult. He stood, went to the fire, and rebuilt it quickly from the banked coals. He wanted tea before either of them went anywhere. He heard her finally move. Heard the soft sounds of her gathering and tying back her hair, pulling on her boot, tightening the lacing on her bodice. When he turned with the kettle, she was fully armed and gathered, her cloak over her shoulders, and she looked exactly as she had when she had blown through the door 3 days ago, except that her eyes were different. 3 days different. He poured. They stood and drank in the same companionable silence they had found the night before. He did not want her to leave, and he was very clear with himself about that fact. The way the abbot had always said one should be clear about the things one wants rather than obscuring them in careful virtue. He wanted her to stay. She would not. She had dispatches. She set down the cup, squared her shoulders, looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. She was better at keeping her face than he was. "Doyle," she said. "Ashwalker. You said you will be at Keen's Fold next. For the winter resupply, yes, about 3 weeks. She nodded once slowly, as if confirming something internal. Then she crossed to him, and he went very still, because she was large and close, and she moved with the deliberate purpose of someone who has made a decision and intends to honor it. She stopped in front of him close, within arm's reach, and then she raised her right hand and pressed her knuckles gently to his forehead. It was orc greeting. He knew it distantly from reading in the cloister, a sign of recognition, of respect, of being seen as kin or worthy companion. Forehead to forehead was the deepest form between equals. Knuckles to forehead was a lesser version, given when one wished to acknowledge another without presuming closeness that had not yet been fully earned. He knew all of this in an abstract way. What he had not anticipated was how it would feel. Her knuckles were warm. They pressed to his forehead with a gentleness entirely at odds with the size and strength of the hand delivering it, and they rested there for 3 seconds, maybe 4, and something in that gesture, the intentionality of it, the deliberate choosing of it from a woman who gave nothing carelessly hit him somewhere below the sternum and kept hitting. His knees, which were generally reliable, made a strong suggestion that the floor might be preferable to standing, and he locked them by will alone. She lowered her hand. Her eyes were level with his, and they were amber. He noticed a deep, clear amber he had somehow not fully registered in 3 days of close quarters, amber with threads of copper in them like firelight through good glass. "Keen's Fold," she said. 3 weeks. She turned and went out the door into the bright, cold morning. He stood in the waystation for a long moment after the door closed. Then he sat down on the nearest bunk, put his face in his hands, and laughed, a helpless, quiet, wondering laugh that he was glad no one was around to hear. 3 weeks later, he was at Keen's Fold. Keen's Fold was the sort of settlement that called itself a town without quite deserving it yet. It sat below the crown of the mountain pass, sheltered in a natural bowl of stone and old-growth pine, its main street a packed dirt scar between a trading post, a stable, a tavern that also served as the local warden outpost, and about 30 other structures of varying ambition and age. In summer it was a trading hub. In deep winter it was a fortress of necessity, the place the mountain people retreated to when the high roads closed, and the place the desperate came when they had nowhere else to go. There were more desperate people than usual this winter. Noah arrived to find the town swollen nearly double, the tavern's common room sleeping 40 people in floor space that was designed for 15, and a tension in the air that he recognized immediately and did not like. The famine from the lowlands had followed the plague like a shadow. People had come up from the lowland villages looking for food, looking for work, looking for any kind of stability, and they had brought their fear with them, and their fear had curdled, the way it always did when there was not enough to go around, into something that needed someone to blame. He found the warden, an older woman named Essa Breck with iron-gray hair and 20 years of mountain experience behind her eyes, and she told him in 3 minutes flat what the situation was. The stores were lower than expected because 2 supply runs had been lost in early-season ice. There were at least 60 more people sheltering in Keen's Fold than the town could comfortably maintain, and there was a faction among the newcomers who had decided that the cause of all their problems was the small community of orc traders who wintered over in the eastern quarter of town every year. "How bad is it?" Noah asked. "Nobody has been hurt yet," Essa said with the emphasis of someone who expected that to change. "But there were threats last week. Somebody painted a ward-away mark on the orc quarter gate." He knew what a ward-away mark was, a death wish symbol, usually painted in red. "I will make my resupply rounds and then see what can be done," he said. "Good," she paused. "Also, there is an Ashwalker courier who came over the high pass 3 days ago, carrying clan dispatches to Surath Kal. She is staying in the orc quarter while she rests before the eastern leg." Essa stopped, looked at him with perceptive eyes. "You have met her." "I sheltered with her during the last storm," he said carefully. "She asked about you when she arrived." Essa's expression gave away very little. "She used your name." He set down his pack on the warden's table and began sorting through his supply manifest with hands that he kept very steady. "I will make the rounds," he said, "and then I will go say hello." He spent the next 4 hours doing his job. He visited every shelter point, every supply cache, every warden box, logged the deficits with the same methodical care that 3 years on the roads had made automatic, and wrote a requisition list that he would send down mountain by the next available runner. He spoke to people. He was good at that, at talking to frightened people without escalating the fear, without dismissing it, without letting it tell him what to think. He talked to the lowland newcomers and he heard real suffering. He also heard, underneath it, the ugly current of something looking for a target. He was heading for the orc quarter gate when it happened. He heard her voice first, that distinctive rough gravel clarity, and then he heard the other voices, and his pace quickened without his consciously choosing it. The gate of the Orc quarter was a simple wooden archway with a crossbar, opening onto a lane of stone and timber houses that the Orc traders had occupied for 30 years. In front of the gate, a crowd of perhaps 20 people had gathered, and in the center of it alone was Zora Ashwalker. She was standing utterly still, which was, he understood immediately, a choice. She was holding her ground without moving, without drawing the blades at her hips, without retreating an inch. Her face was stone. Her hands were at her sides, open. The man in front of her was a head shorter and approximately half her width, and he was loud in the way of someone who has an audience and believes the audience is on his side. He was holding a clay pot of something red, and the ward-away mark on the gate was fresh and wet. He had, Noah realized, just painted it. And now he was explaining to Zora, very loudly, in terms that Noah was not going to repeat even in his own memory, what was going to happen to the Orc quarter and everyone in it if they did not clear out by morning. The crowd around him was not all in agreement. Noah could read a crowd, and maybe a third of the people watching were uncomfortable, arms crossed, looking at the ground. But a crowd with a third of people uncomfortable and 2/3 performing solidarity with a man holding a paint pot is still a crowd that can turn fast. He walked through the edge of it. He heard someone say something sharp about him, a human man walking toward an orc, toward the wrong side. He ignored it. He crossed through the press of bodies with the steady, unhurried pace of the cloister. The abbot had always said that panic is contagious and so is calm, and he put himself next to Zora. Not in front of her, next to her, shoulder level with her ribs given the height difference. He looked at the man with the paint pot. "Put that down," he said. The man blinked. "Who the hell are you?" Noah showed the warden's medallion. "My name is Noah Doyle. I am a warden's walker assigned to Keen's Fold. That mark you have painted on that gate is a criminal offense under Mountain Charter, which means Warden Breck is going to have a formal conversation with you about it." As for the rest of this, he looked at the crowd. He looked at them each as individually as he could, quickly. "You are frightened people in a hard winter, I know that, but this is not the way. The Orc quarter has been here 30 years. These traders have fed this town in lean seasons. They are not why your winter is hard." "They carry the plague," someone shouted. "No," Noah said. "The plague is a disease. It does not belong to a people. If you want proof, I spent 3 days in a sealed waystation with an Ashwalker courier during the worst of the last storm. I have been on these mountains for 3 years. I am standing here in front of you." Silence. He could feel Zora very close beside him, not quite touching, and the absolute controlled stillness of her. Then Zora moved. She did not draw a weapon. She did not raise her voice. She turned to the man with the paint pot and she looked at him for a long, quiet moment, and then she held out her bare right hand, palm up open, empty. And she said, in a voice pitched to carry to every person in that crowd, "I carried dispatches to the fortress at the crown of the pass. Those dispatches included the winter supply routes. Because I delivered them, there are 3 supply sledges that will arrive in Keen's Fold within the week. I know because I arranged it with the clan traders at the top of the pass." She paused. "You can paint your marks and make your threats, or you can step aside and let me finish my work, which is, at present, also keeping this town fed." It was not magic. It was not a sword. It was better than both. It was information delivered by a woman with the composure of a mountain, to a crowd that was hungry and scared, and at its core, looking for a reason to be talked down from something it did not actually want to do. The uncomfortable third of the crowd moved first. 2 of them stepped back and created a gap. Then 3 more. The man with the paint pot looked around at his suddenly uncertain audience, and the performance drained out of his face, leaving just tiredness and embarrassment. He put the pot down. Noah stayed still until the crowd had dispersed. Then he let out a breath. He turned to look at Zora. She was already looking at him. He said, 3 supply sledges. Yes, you arranged that. I am a logistics courier. Arranging supply lines is what I do." A pause, very brief. Also, I may have specifically planned the Keen's fold stop partly because I knew you would be here, and I wanted to have something useful to offer this town so that the situation I just endured would not happen." He stared at her. "You planned this stop. The dispatches required it," she said, perfectly neutral. And then a fraction of a second later, a tiny shift at the corner of her mouth, just a fraction, he laughed. It came out of him helplessly the same way it had in the waystation. "You are the most prepared person I have ever met in my life," he said. "I prefer to be useful," she said, and turned and walked through the gate into the Orc quarter. He followed her because she had not said not to. She was staying in a room above the Orc quarters, trading house, small, clean, with a window that looked out over the mountain bowl. She had been there 3 days, and it was already organized with that same precise efficiency he had seen in the waystation. Gear in specific places, supplies accounted for, a small neat arrangement on the writing table where her dispatch case sat. He sat on the room's single stool, which was sized for a human-scale trading house, and looked absurd given that she had to fold herself almost in half to sit on the edge of the cot. This made her briefly at something approaching his eye level, and she gave him a look that suggested she was aware of the comedy of the situation and did not intend to acknowledge it. "You stood next to me," she said. "Yes. You did not step in front of me." "You did not need someone to step in front of you." "No," she agreed. But it was, she paused. He had learned in the waystation what her pauses meant. They meant she was choosing a word with precision. "Not common," she said finally. "Most humans who have, on occasion, attempted to assist me in such moments have done so by standing in front of me, as if I were a child to be shielded." "You were handling it," he said. "I came to stand beside you. That is different." She looked at him for a long moment in that amber-eyed, assessing way. "Yes," she said, "it is." He said, "The dispatches. You are heading east next. In 2 or 3 days, once the eastern road is confirmed passable." "I'm heading east as well," he said. "My winter circuit includes the Surath crossing and 2 warden caches in the eastern territories." He met her eyes. "I have never had a traveling companion on the circuit." She did not answer immediately. She looked at him, and this time the pause was longer. He waited, the way he had learned to wait in the cloister, not with impatience hidden under a still face, but genuinely waiting, genuinely making space for whatever the other person needed to fill it. She said, "The eastern road through the Surath territories is not easy for a human man traveling alone. Some of the mountain communities along the way are clan-controlled. They would question a human walker without escort." "I know," he said. "I would be considered an adequate escort. I would be considered very fortunate company," he said, and she gave him a look that he was now fairly certain was the Zora Ashwalker equivalent of being warmly amused, which on anyone else might have been an actual smile. They left for the eastern road 2 days later, after the supply sledges had arrived, as she had promised, and the mood in Keen's fold had shifted from dangerous to merely exhausted and relieved. Noah made sure Warden Breck had everything she needed before he went. He also filed the formal complaint about the ward-away mark with the regional warden record. He did not tell Zora he had done this, but she found out anyway. She found most things out, and she said nothing about it, except that the next morning she had packed his trail rations for him with a precision and care that took his breath away a little. The eastern road was hard in the way that all high mountain roads were hard. Technically demanding, physically exhausting, breathtakingly beautiful. Noah was in good condition for a man who was not a warrior. 3 years of walking loaded high roads had built him lean and sure-footed, and the cloister's years of physical labor before that had laid good foundation. He kept pace with her. She set a pace that was designed, he was fairly sure, to see what he could manage, and she adjusted it smoothly when she understood his capabilities, not condescendingly, just practically. They talked. They talked more and more easily than they had in the waystation, because the road gave them movement to pour words into, gave them things to look at and refer to, gave them the natural rhythm of shared purpose. He asked about Clan Ashwalker, and she told him things, carefully at first, then with increasing detail, as if she was choosing to trust him with each additional piece of information and keeping track that he handled each one well. He told her about the cloister, about the eastern village where he had grown up, about his father who had been a stonemason and had built half the walls in the village before his back gave out. "You are a builder's son," she said. "I am. It shows." She said this as though it were a practical observation rather than a compliment, but the look that came with it was warm. "How?" "The way you tend a fire," she said. "The way you repaired the loose hinge on the waystation storm shutter before we left. The way you packed the resupply cache at Keene's Fold solid, even, built to last." She was looking ahead at the road when she said this, her profile clean and strong against the cold sky. "You do not do things carelessly." He thought about that for a while. Then he said, "The abbot always said that carelessness is a kind of disrespect. You are telling the thing you are doing that it does not matter enough to be done well." She turned and looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her face before, something almost open. "Your abbot was wise," she said. "He was insufferable," Noah said. "But yes, also wise," she laughed. He heard at this time an actual laugh, genuine, deep, and brief, cut off as if surprised it had escaped. He felt it like sunlight. They camped the first night in a sheltered hollow below a granite shelf, building a small fire and sitting close to it, while the stars appeared above them in the high, thin air, hard and brilliant and cold. He was aware of her proximity in a way that had been becoming steadily more acute since Keene's Fold. She was close because the fire was small and the cold was significant, and he was aware of every place where they were nearly touching, and of the vast, careful gap he was maintaining between nearly and actually. She reached out and took his cup from his hands, poured more tea into it from the trail kettle, handed it back. Their fingers touched this time. She did not pull back immediately. Neither did he. For about 3 seconds they were both very still, fingers overlapping on the cold tin, and the air between them changed the way mountain air changes before a storm, pressure dropping, everything holding its breath. Then she handed him the cup and looked back at the fire. He drank his tea. The second day of travel brought them to the first of the clan-controlled communities. She had mentioned a mountain waypost called Arax Gate, named for some clan ancestor he did not know. It was not unfriendly, exactly, but it was watchful, and the 2 orc men at the gate looked at Noah with the particular expression of people deciding whether a thing is a problem or not. Zora said in the mountain clan tongue, a sentence that included his name and the word for warden and several other things he could not follow. The men looked at him again. One of them said something back, and Zora replied, and the one who had spoken made a gesture, a sharp half-bow, not to Noah but to her, and they stepped aside. "What did you tell them?" he asked as they passed through. "That you are my companion," she said, "under my word. That is all. That is everything for clan-held ground," she said. "My word covers you here." He thought about the weight of that. A woman's word in a place where her word carried real currency, extended over him like a shield. He thought about the fact that she had done it without hesitation and without making anything of it, as if it were simply the natural and obvious thing. "Thank you," he said. She gave him a look. "Do not thank me for sensible arrangements," she said. "I will thank you for whatever I like," he said, with a mildness that he knew from long practice carried considerable stubbornness, and she turned forward again with that fraction of a curve at the corner of her mouth. At Arax Gate they rested for a few hours and ate a proper hot meal. The gate wardens had a fire and a pot going, and they fed them without drama, the same road hospitality that the warden system tried to provide on the human side of the mountains. Noah ate with the same easy manners he brought to everything, and by the time they were ready to leave, one of the gatemen had told him, via Zora's translation, that the abbot's system of fire building was inefficient, and he should use a different method. And Noah had engaged with this suggestion so genuinely and curiously that the gate man had spent 20 minutes demonstrating while Noah asked questions. Zora watched this happen from across the fire. He caught her eye once. She looked away immediately, but not before he saw something on her face that he thought, carefully and without wanting to be wrong about it, might be affection. The eastern road dropped in elevation as it curved away from the central spine of the mountains toward the Surath territories, and the snow became thinner, the air slightly warmer, the landscape shifting from the barren grandeur of the high pass to the rougher, more complex terrain of the mountain foothills, mixed forest, frozen streams, the occasional stone ruin of something that predated both their people's memories. It was wild and old and deeply beautiful, and Noah said so at one point, looking out over a valley full of pine trees with frost on every needle making the whole thing glitter in the low winter sun. Yes, she said simply, and the word had the quality of someone agreeing about a thing they love. Did you grow up seeing this? He asked. Near enough. Surath Kal is 2 days east of here. She was looking at the valley too. When I was young, before I was a courier, I used to walk these hills just to walk them. No destination, no dispatch, a pause. My mother thought I was strange. Your mother sounds like the abbot. She is much better company than the abbot sounds. Is she? He stopped, not wanting to ask something wrong. She is alive, Zora said, reading the hesitation correctly. In Surath Kal, she leads the clan's textile trade. She is formidable and has very firm opinions about the correct way to cure hides. She said this with a dryness that was clearly well practiced and deeply fond. She will probably have opinions about you as well. He processed this. About me specifically. I send reports when I am on a long circuit, she said, in a tone that was perfectly neutral. I may have included information. He was quiet for a moment, feeling something warm move through him at the thought. Then he said, What kind of information? The useful kind, she said. Ashwalker, Doyle, you told your mother about me. She looked at him sideways and said with perfect equanimity, I told my mother I had met an extraordinary human man who tended a fire like a builder and listened like a monk and stood beside a mountain woman in a crowd without attempting to stand in front of her. Yes, she looked forward again. She sent back 7 words, which were, bring him. He stopped walking entirely. She took 2 more steps before she realized and turned to look at him. He was standing in the middle of the eastern road with the frost-needled valley behind him and a look on his face that he was not even trying to manage because he did not have the capacity for management at the moment. She looked at him steadily. That is, he stopped, started again. I do not fully understand what that means, in clan terms. In clan terms, she said carefully, it is a considerable statement. How considerable? My mother has met one man she considered worth the word bring in the last 30 years, Zora said. He is my father. They have been together 26 years. She held his gaze. So when I say considerable, I mean the kind of considerable that has implications. He was quiet for a long moment. He could hear the wind in the pines below and the distant sound of water moving under ice somewhere, and his heart was doing something it had never quite done before, not exactly racing, more like beating with a new weight, a fullness it was not used to. He said, And you? What do you mean? She crossed back to him in 3 strides. She stopped very close enough that he could see the copper threads in her amber eyes, close enough that she filled his field of vision, magnificent and steady and real. I have been thinking about you since the waystation, she said. I have been thinking about a human man who made me tea, who listened to me talk about my home, who went still when I pressed my knuckles to his forehead and whose knees, Doyle. Your knees nearly buckled, I noticed, and I have been thinking that I do not want to be a courier who passes through your life and leaves. I have been thinking that I want to be a presence in it. She stopped. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I am not practiced at saying these things. My people show. We do not often say. But I have decided that with you, I should say, because you listen and because you deserve to know clearly. His throat was tight. He said, I have been thinking about you since the waystation too. I know, she said. You are not a difficult person to read despite what you may believe. He laughed, short and startled. What gave me away? The way you looked at me when I picked up my pack to leave, she said, and the fact that you showed up at Keen's Fold exactly when I was there. She tilted her head. The timing of a man who has memorized a courier circuit. He had, in fact, memorized her circuit. He had not intended to do it consciously. He had just found that the information was sitting very clearly in his memory after she had mentioned it in passing in the waystation. He said, "I'm not sure what the next step looks like between us. I want to be honest that I do not entirely know the shape of what you are offering." "The shape," she said, "in clan terms is this. You travel with me to Surath Kal. You meet my mother and my father and my people. They will assess you. You will be given the chance to assess them. If at the end of this we both decide we are certain, the clan will hold a claiming. It is not complicated. It is simply us and witnesses and a declaration before people who matter. And then you would be my mate and I would be yours. And that is binding in a way that your human ceremonies are also, I believe, intended to be binding." "A claiming before we fully know each other," he said. "Before the full certainty, yes," she said. "That is the Orc way. We do not court for years and then decide. We decide and then we build the love inside what we have decided. It is," she stopped, considered. "It requires a particular kind of courage." He thought about that. He thought about 6 years in the cloister, learning that commitment precedes comfort, that faith is not the absence of uncertainty but the decision to act in spite of it. He thought about the abbot saying, in one of his more useful moments, that a man who waits until he is certain will wait forever, because certainty is the reward of commitment, not its precondition. He said, "I understand that kind of courage." Her eyes did something, a deepening, a warmth that she let him see that he suspected she did not let many people see. She said, "I know you do. That is part of why I want you." He reached up and took her hand where it hung at her side. Her fingers were large and warm and they curled around his, with a careful, precise strength. He held it, this hand of hers with its warrior's knuckles and its tender memory of pressing to his forehead, and he said, "Then take me to Surath Kal." The road to Surath Kal was 2 more days, and those 2 days were different from the first 2, not in their outward shape, because they were still walking a winter road through frozen terrain, still making camp and cooking trail meals and maintaining the practical rhythms of travel. They were different in every inward sense. Something had been named. Something had been put into the open air between them, and with it came a loosening of the careful management they had both been performing. She reached for his hand when the road narrowed and they had to walk single file on a ledge above a drop. She did not need to. Her balance was better than his. It was not a safety gesture, and she did not let go when the ledge widened out again. He did not mention this. He simply walked alongside her with her hand warm in his and watched the winter landscape and felt something in his chest that he had no exact word for, only the sense of it, fullness, and the end of a certain kind of quiet that had been, for 3 years, just slightly too quiet. On the second afternoon he kissed her. It was not planned. They had stopped to drink at a stream where the ice had cracked and water ran free and cold over brown stones, and she was kneeling beside it with her head tilted back after drinking, and the afternoon light was hitting her face, her strong, beautiful, extraordinary face, and he crouched beside her, and she turned to look at him, and he simply leaned in and kissed her. She went very still for 1 second. Then she kissed him back, and she kissed him the way she did everything, with complete and deliberate intention, with no uncertainty in it at all, with a warmth that hit him like stepping inside from the cold. Her hand came up and cupped the back of his head gently for someone who could have crushed stone, and he made a sound against her mouth that he would have been embarrassed about if he were capable of embarrassment in that moment, which he was not. When they separated, she was looking at him from about 2 inches away, amber eyes very clear. "Finally," she said. "I was not going to presume," he said. "You have been not presuming for 5 days," she said. It was becoming very loud. He laughed against her cheek, and she allowed this, and he kissed her once more quickly, briefly, and they stood up and shouldered their packs and walked the rest of the road to Surath Kal with a quality of happiness between them that neither of them said anything about because it did not require saying. Surath Kal was more than he had expected. He had built a picture of it from her descriptions, the eastern ridgelines, the salt flats, the market crossroads, but the reality of it was larger and older and more alive. The clan's winter settlement was built against the base of a great rock outcropping, half of it carved into the rock itself. Broad, low stone doorways, rooms that went back into the mountain, fires deep inside throwing amber warmth through every opening. The buildings that extended outward from the rock were solid, timber and stone construction, clearly built by people who knew what a serious winter looked like, with thick walls and low roof lines, and the smoke of many hearths rising into the cold air. There were perhaps 200 people here for the winter clan members, their dependents, the network of traders and allies that made a mountain clan function. They looked at Noah with frank curiosity, not hostility, a few with wariness, but the majority with the particular interested appraisal of people who have been told that Zora Ashwalker is bringing someone and are now sizing up whether the report matches the reality. He was intensely aware of being assessed. He walked beside Zora with his warden's medallion visible and his bearing as steady as he could make it, because he had enough sense to understand that this was an entrance, and entrances matter. Zora's mother was exactly as he had pictured her, which was to say she was formidable in a way that did not require any particular demonstration. She was perhaps 50, gray-streaked where Zora was solid black, slightly shorter though still taller than most humans, with her daughter's amber eyes and a quality of stillness that made him understand where Zora had learned it. Her name was Zora Ashwalker. She looked at Noah for about 10 seconds and then she looked at Zora, and she said something in the clan tongue. Zora replied. Her voice was level, but there was a note in it he had not heard before, something younger, something that was the voice she used with her mother specifically. Zora Ashwalker looked back at Noah. In perfectly good trade tongue, she said, "My daughter says you stood beside her in a crowd, not in front." She did not need anyone to stand in front of her, he said. Rael regarded him for another moment. Then she said, "Come inside. There is food." Zora looked at him with what he was coming to recognize as relief wearing its best imitation of calm. Inside, the Ashwalker hearthroom was warm and well-furnished, not lavish but deeply comfortable, the kind of room that had been lived in and loved for many years. Zora's father, Zora Ashwalker, was a broad, quiet man with a hand clasp like a stonework press and eyes that missed nothing, who shook Noah's hand and said, "You work the Warden Road." And when Noah confirmed it, simply nodded once as if this told him everything he needed to know. The meal was good. Noah ate and talked and listened and asked honest questions, and the family around the table, there were cousins, a younger sibling, Rael's sister and her husband, assessed him with the same frank interest the settlement had shown, and he answered them without performance, without trying to be impressive, simply being what he was, a builder's son who had found his way to a mountain road, trying to do some good on it. Under the table, Zora's knee pressed against his. It stayed there. After the meal, when the others had dispersed to the evening's business, Rael brought out a clay bottle of something amber and poured 3 cups. She pushed one to Noah, one to Zora, and kept one herself. She looked between them. "My daughter has told me what she intends," she said. "She intends a claiming. She tells me she has already told you what this means." "She has," he said. "You are human," Rael said. "Not accusatory, simply the fact on the table to be dealt with honestly." "Yes. A claiming is permanent within clan law," she said. "If you do this and then leave or change your mind, the injury to her is—" She stopped. Selected a word carefully. "Considerable. I understand. Do you?" She looked at him steadily. "You are young. You have been on a road alone for 3 years. This road we are offering you is not the Warden Circuit. It leads somewhere specific." "I know where it leads," he said. He looked at Zora, and she was looking at him with those amber eyes, and he said, "I have been looking for somewhere specific for 3 years. I had not anticipated it would have this particular shape, but I am not interested in refusing something real because it is unexpected." Rael was quiet. Then she picked up her cup. She said, "We will hold the claiming in 3 days when the full settlement is gathered." She drank, set the cup down. "Welcome, Noah Doyle. I will probably have opinions about your fire-building method." "I have been told there is a better one," he said. "I would like to learn it." Zora Ashwalker smiled. It was, now that he could see where Zora had inherited it from, brilliant and brief, and almost reluctant, as if smiling were a resource to be spent carefully. The 3 days before the claiming were the strangest and most vivid 3 days of Noah's life to that point. He was not idle. The clan had a natural talent for putting an extra pair of hands to use, and he was set to work immediately on a supply inventory that a cousin was conducting, which he approached with the same methodical care he brought to warden caches, and which earned him a respect that was practical and genuine. He helped repair a section of roof on the outer buildings that had been damaged by an ice fall. He sat for a long time with Rael's sister, who was the settlement's healer, and they compared notes on mountain sickness and cold exposure treatment with the focused mutual interest of two people who each know something the other does not. He ate with the family every meal. He slept in the guest room carved into the rock. He was treated with the careful, genuine hospitality of people who knew this was a trial period and were conducting it honestly. And Zora was present through all of it, not constantly. She had her own responsibilities, dispatches to file, reports to deliver to the clan council, but present enough. She found him at the end of each day, and they sat together, sometimes talking, sometimes not, in a companionship that felt as natural as breathing. She had a dry, precise sense of humor that emerged in layers, each one requiring you to have understood the previous layer before it would reveal itself. And he found that he was sharp enough for most of them, and that she looked pleased and not very surprised when he got them. On the second night she came and sat beside him at the hearth in the common room after most of the others had gone to sleep, and she told him things she had not told him before, about the years just after the plague arrived in the lowlands, about what it had been like to watch the eastern trade routes close, about the fear that had lived in the clan that winter, not of the plague itself, but of what frightened humans would do. About the two young clan men who had been turned back at a lowland town with crossbows leveled at them, and who had come home with something broken in their eyes. She told him this quietly, without drama, and he listened the way he always did, which was to say completely, and when she was done he said, "I am sorry, your people were failed by mine." She looked at him. "Not by you." "No," he agreed, "but by the shape of things I was part of. The charter I work under did not protect your people adequately. I have known this for a while. I have been thinking about how to address it." He paused. "I was going to file a formal report to the regional warden authority. I have been composing it in my head for 2 months. It is fairly pointed." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Would it help to have specific incidents documented? Names, dates, locations." "Enormously." "I have them," she said. "I'm a courier. I document everything." He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "You are extraordinary." She looked away, and the motion had a self-consciousness he had not seen from her before, a very slight, very genuine disconcertion, as if being called extraordinary without any qualifier was something she did not have an immediate response for. "I am practical," she said. "Both," he said. "You are both." She was quiet for another moment. Then she leaned very slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone making a conscious choice, and pressed her shoulder against his. He leaned back. They sat that way by the fire for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, and the fire burned down, and neither of them moved. The claiming was held on the morning of the 3rd day. It was, as she had promised, not complicated. The full settlement gathered in the broad central space between the rock face and the outer buildings. 200 people in the cold winter morning air, breath rising in clouds, bundled against the temperature, watching with the focused attention of people for whom this was both a ceremony and a community matter. The clan elder, a woman of considerable age named Ashk, presided with the unhurried authority of someone who had done this before, and took it seriously without taking herself too seriously. Zora stood before the settlement in her travel leathers, the fitted dark bodice and close-cut breeches and knee-high boots, her black hair loose for the occasion clan custom. Rael had explained, loose hair for claiming, a declaration of something being opened rather than bound. And she was so beautiful and so terribly composed that Noah, standing across from her in the best clothes he owned, which were honestly not very impressive, felt something between awe and a laughter that was not quite amusement and not quite tears. Ashk spoke in the clan tongue, and Rael stood at Noah's shoulder and translated quietly. She was asking if this was freely chosen, if there was any coercion, if the clan had any objection. She received answers she was satisfied with. Then Ashk looked at Noah specifically and spoke directly to him in trade tongue, slowly and clearly. She said, "This claiming is not a contract. It is not an agreement with conditions attached. It is a statement of belonging. You will belong to her and she to you, and your people will be asked to hold this binding, and she will hold it and you will hold it. Do you take the weight of this willingly?" He said, "Yes." Ashk said, "Say why." He had not expected to be asked why. He was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes in the cold morning air and the presence of the woman in front of him. And then he said what was simply true, because simple truth was what the moment deserved. He said, "Because she sees me. Not as a category, not as a useful thing, not as a fear or a problem to be managed. She sees me as myself, and she chose that self, and I have been a long time looking for someone who would. And because when I look at her, I see a woman who is extraordinary and careful and funny and fierce, and I want to be the person she chooses for the rest of my life. And because my knees nearly buckled the first time she touched my forehead, and I have not recovered, and I have no particular interest in recovering." There was a sound from the settlement, not exactly a reaction, more like a collective exhale. He heard Rael make a small sound beside him. He did not look away from Zora. Zora was looking at him with her amber eyes open and unguarded in a way he had not seen before. And something was moving on her face that she was not managing, not containing, that she was simply allowing, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She said in the clan tongue, and then she looked at him and said it again in trade tongue, which she had not had to do. "I see you, Noah Doyle. You are mine and I am yours, and I have chosen this freely and with full knowledge, and I will choose it every day forward." Ashk said a word. Rael translated, "Done." The settlement made a sound, the clan equivalent of an ovation, which was not cheering but a deep collective sound made in the throat, something between a hum and a resonance that seemed to come from the rock face itself, and that hit Noah in the sternum and stayed there. Zora crossed to him in 3 strides and kissed him. She kissed him the way she had at the stream, with complete and decided intention, but here in front of her entire people. In the bright cold morning, with the resonance of the settlement still hanging in the air, it was something else entirely. He put his hands on her face, reaching up, given the height difference, which he registered with an odd, warm humor, and kissed her back with everything he had, and the settlement made its sound again. The celebration that followed was the particular kind that mountain people hold in winter, practical, warm, and built around the things that sustain life. There was food, a genuine feast, which Noah understood was a considerable expenditure of winter stores, and which told him something about how the clan felt about the occasion. There was music from 3 people, with instruments he did not recognize, but that sounded like something between strings and bells. There was the very specific warmth of being in the middle of a community that has decided you are theirs now. He sat beside Zora through all of it, and she sat beside him, and at some point their hands were linked on the table and stayed that way, and he could feel the weight of what had just happened settling into him like good foundation stone, solid and load-bearing and made to last. Rael sat across from him at one point and showed him, wordlessly, how to do the fire-building method she had mentioned. He studied it seriously. It was, he admitted, probably more efficient. She looked gratified. The winter day was short, and by the time the light began to fail, the celebration had wound toward its quieter end, people drifting to their tasks and hearths, the settlement resuming its rhythms with a new name incorporated into them. Noah walked with Zora out to the edge of the settlement where the rock face met the outer buildings, where the view opened south and west toward the mountain spine, the last light making the snow on the distant peaks glow rose gold. She stood behind him and wrapped her arms around him from behind. She was large enough to encompass him almost entirely, her chin resting on the top of his head, her arms a warm, absolute weight across his chest, and he leaned into her and felt the word safe in his body without having to think it. "You said your knees buckled," she said. "Nearly, I said nearly buckled. You said it to the whole settlement." "I stand by it," he said. "It was true." She made a sound in her chest, vibration he could feel through her arms where they held him. It was the sound she made instead of laughing outright when something pleased her deeply. He had come to love that sound with a speed and intensity that should probably have alarmed him and didn't. "Your document," she said. "The report to the warden authority about the quarantine abuses." "Yes. I will give you everything I have, every incident. I can also arrange for statements from the clan council, written, sealed with clan mark." "That will make the report extremely difficult to ignore," he said. "That is the intention," she said. He turned in her arms so he was facing her, which meant his face was approximately level with her collarbone. And he looked up at her and she looked down at him and she was smiling properly, fully, the brilliant, reluctant smile that was not reluctant at all. He understood now, but simply precise. Reserved for things that truly warranted it. He said, "I want you to know something. The circuit the warden rode, it runs through these mountains for a reason. Not just to keep supply caches stocked. To keep things connected, people and communities and places that a frightened world would like to separate." "I know," she said. "I want to keep doing it," he said. "With you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm a courier. I run the high passes. I know. We would both be on the roads most of the year. I know. Surath Kal in the winters," she said. "Your warden's circuit in the traveling seasons." "Yes," she looked at him steadily. "You want to build this life on a road." "I want to build this life with you," he said. "The road is the shape of it. I am content with the shape." She kissed him again, shorter this time but warmer if that was possible. She pulled back and looked at him, and her eyes were amber and copper, and full of something he was going to spend years learning the vocabulary of, and he was looking forward to every lesson. "Then we will be the most road-worn mated pair in the eastern mountains," she said. "We will be the most road-worn mated pair in living memory," he agreed happily. They sent the warden report down mountain 3 days later, packed with Zora's documentation, 23 specific incidents, dated and placed and witnessed, with clan council signatures on every page. Noah added his own warden record of the Hethwick incident and 3 others he had personally witnessed. It was, as he had predicted, extremely pointed. He sent it with a rider to Warden Breck, with instructions to pass it to the regional authority, and Breck's reply came back within the week. The Regional Warden Council would convene a formal hearing in the spring. It was not a solution. Solutions took time, took sustained pressure, took people who stayed on the road and kept pushing. But it was a beginning, and Noah Doyle was a patient man. He spent the rest of the winter in Surath Kal. He learned the fire-building method properly. He worked on the supply inventory and helped reinforce the storage caves. He sat with Zora in the evenings and they read dispatches together and planned the spring circuit, which routes needed attention, which waystations had been reported damaged, where the tension between the hungry lowland towns and the clan territories was likely to flare again. He learned the clan tongue slowly, with more mistakes than he cared to count. Zora corrected him with a patience she did not extend to most things, which he found endearing. Rail offered corrections with what he suspected was actual enjoyment at his expense. He accepted all of them with the equanimity of a man who had learned, in 6 years of a cloister, that pride about language acquisition was the fastest way to never acquire it. He wrote letters to the abbot not asking for anything, just reporting, the way he always had. The abbot's reply came back 1 week before the spring thaw, carried by a lowland merchant who had come over the southern pass. It was 3 sentences. "I am glad you have found where you belong. I told you the world needed you more than the cloister did. Do not forget to keep the fire properly banked before you sleep." He left the letter on the writing table in the guest room for Zora to find. Knowing she would read it, she read everything. It was a professional instinct. And when she found it, she said nothing, just set it back exactly where it had been. But that evening she sat very close beside him and her hand found his without ceremony, and he understood. The spring thaw came in the way it always did in the high mountains. Not gently, not gracefully, but with a crash and rush of melting snow, and cascading water and mud, and the sudden violent return of bird sound where there had been only wind. The high passes reopened slowly, tested first by the bravest and most experienced travelers, then widened by traffic, and the warden crews Noah had been coordinating with by messenger all winter. He and Zora were among the first through the Sureth crossing when the snow level dropped enough, carrying the spring circuit's first dispatch bag. They moved through the mountains together in the way they had moved during those first 5 days on the eastern road, but without the careful management, without the gap. They walked the same pace, chose the same campsites, built fires together with a combination of her method and his that was honestly better than either approach alone. They talked about everything and nothing. She knew 10 times as much as he did about mountain ecology and clan politics and supply logistics, and he knew things she did not about human-side politics and warden charter and the histories of the mountain passes, and they traded information like merchants who have discovered that each carries what the other needs. At Keen's Fold, Warden Breck met them on the road before they reached the gate, which told him something about how well-networked Breck was. She looked at them together, at the ease between them, at the way they occupied the same space without any of the careful gaps of strangers, and she nodded once. "The regional hearing is in 6 weeks," she said. "They want testimony." "They will have it," Zora said, "written and in person." Breck looked at her, a long, assessing look, not unfriendly. She said, "You are Ashwalker." "I am," Zora said. "I have read your incident documentation," Breck said. "It is the most thorough thing I have received in 20 years of wardens." She paused. "I would like to work with you on the spring supply coordination. The Orc Quarter traders, if they are willing, could solve about 40% of the distribution problem we are expecting in the eastern reaches." Zora's eyebrow moved a fraction. "They will be willing," she said. "I will speak to them." Breck nodded again, the gesture of a woman filing something important. She looked at Noah. "You are responsible for this." "She was already extraordinary when I found her," he said. "I just showed up next to her." "Keep doing that," Breck said, and turned and walked back toward Keen's Fold. The Orc Quarter gate had a new frame. The old one with the painted ward-away mark had been taken down and replaced. Warden Breck had apparently moved on this with considerable speed after Noah's complaint was filed. The man who had done the painting was no longer in Keen's Fold. He had left before the formal inquiry had found him, which Noah considered something of a disappointment, but the mark was gone and the gate was clean, and the Orc Quarter traders were carefully, watchfully beginning to re-engage with the main town. It was slow. It was the kind of slow that could not be rushed. Noah and Zora spent 3 days at Keen's Fold, and in those 3 days they helped broker 2 specific supply arrangements between the Orc Quarter traders and the lowland settlers who had most needed grain through the winter, and both arrangements completed without incident. It was not a revolution. It was the beginning of something. They were on the road north by mid-morning of the 4th day, heading for the first of the high waystation checks on the spring circuit. The pass where the waystation sat was still carrying significant snowpack, but the station itself had survived the winter well. The roof was intact, the door worked, and the emergency stores were only slightly depleted from what he had left. He stood in the doorway and looked at the interior. The 2 stone bunks, the single fireplace, the shelf, the iron hook. He had a very specific memory of kneeling at this fireplace with numb hands and wet tinder, and of a door flying open. Zora stepped up beside him and looked at the same room. She said, "The The first night I was here I thought you were probably going to be a nuisance. I thought you were probably going to be extraordinary, he said. You knew me for 30 seconds. I knew you for long enough, he said. She turned to look at him, and she had the full smile on, the brilliant, reluctant, precisely calibrated smile that meant something had deeply reached her, and he felt it the way he had felt the knuckles on his forehead. A warmth that started at the point of contact and spread through everything. He crossed the threshold and went to lay the fire. She came in behind him and dropped the crossbar on the door, not because of a storm this time, but because she chose to, and sat on the bunk that had once been hers, and watched him with amber eyes in the cold gray light of a mountain afternoon, and the room was warm with something that had nothing to do with the fire that had not been lit yet. He looked over his shoulder at her. You are going to tell me I am banking it wrong. I am going to let you do it your way first and see how long it takes you to come around to the better method, she said. That is the longest setup for I was right that I have ever heard. I have patience, she said serenely. I spent a winter with a very stubborn human. I can afford to wait. I am not stubborn, he said. I am methodical. Those are the same thing, Doyle. They are absolutely not the same thing, Ashwalker. Name one difference. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked back at the fire. She made the sound, the deep, resonant vibration instead of laughter sound, and he felt it all the way across the room. He got the fire going. It was good and strong in about 10 minutes, which he considered a personal vindication, and he did not say so because she would have something to say about the method regardless. He filled the kettle. He turned with 2 cups already measured. She was looking at him from the bunk with a quality of attention that was not casual, and he held it without looking away, because he had learned was learning, to hold the full weight of what she offered without flinching from it, which was the hardest and the most important thing anyone had ever asked of him. She said, "Come here." He crossed the room and sat beside her on the bunk close, her warmth on his left side, the fire's warmth on his right, and she put her arm around him with a deliberate ease, and he leaned into her the way he had leaned against the rock face that first evening in Zora Ashwalker, and the world outside was the mountain and the cold and the long spring road ahead of them, and the world inside was this. He said, the hearing in 6 weeks. After that, she said, we begin the summer circuit. That carries us east again by August. Zora Ashwalker before the autumn storms, she confirmed, and the winter after that. Zora Ashwalker again, she said. Unless the warden authority gives you reason to winter elsewhere. I would like to see the salt flats, he said. You said the clan children race on them in autumn. She was quiet for a moment, then, I raced on them when I was 12. My mother still claims I cheated. Did you? I found a more efficient route, she said. This is not the same thing as cheating, he laughed. Methodical, he said, a pause, then quietly, yes. And there was something in the word, a warmth, a claiming of it, that told him she had heard what he meant. The kettle began to sound. He poured. She took her cup without ceremony, the way she always did, and drank with the same unhurried satisfaction she brought to a good meal. And he drank his and thought about salt flats and autumn races, and the particular angle of winter light through stone-carved doorways in Zora Ashwalker. The spring gave them clear roads and complicated politics, and 3 separate confrontations with lowland communities that needed careful handling, and they handled them. Together, each with the skills the other did not have, covering each other's blind sides with a practical precision that felt like it had always been natural, and had actually been learned in the span of 1 winter and 1 spring road. He stood beside her and she stood beside him, and neither of them stood in front, and they got through things that neither of them could have managed alone. The regional warden hearing in the early summer was 3 days of testimony, arguments, and counter-arguments that Noah found both exhausting and oddly similar to the discussions he had endured in the cloister on theological fine points. The outcome was not everything he had hoped for and was considerably more than he had feared. a formal recognition that the quarantine enforcement in the Eastern Mountain Territories had violated multiple provisions of the Mountain Charter, a mandate for review of those enforcement records, and most practically, the appointment of a joint liaison position, human and orc, for supply coordination through the eastern passes. Warden Breck was appointed on the human side. Zora was asked formally if Clan Ashwalker would nominate someone for the orc side. Zora looked at the hearing panel for a long moment. Then she said, "I will serve." It was not a courier position. It required her to attend quarterly councils in Keen's Fold and to maintain regular communication with both the Warden Authority and the Clan Council. It required her to step partially out of the pure courier role she had occupied for years. He caught her eye across the table, and she looked at him steadily, and he thought about what it cost her and what it meant that she was choosing it anyway, and he held her gaze until she looked back at the panel. On the road back east that evening, he said, "You did not have to take that role." "I know," she said. "It changes your circuit significantly." "I know. Is it what you want?" She walked in silence for a moment. "Then I want the thing it achieves. I have the skills it requires. The logistics work alone makes it worth someone doing, and I am more qualified than most." She glanced at him. "And it means I spend more time at Keen's Fold, which is where your circuit centers." He took her hand. She let him, fingers wrapping around his with that careful, precise strength. He said, "You arranged it so we would overlap more." "I identified a professional opportunity that also addressed a logistical concern," she said. He laughed, and the summer road opened ahead of them, and somewhere to the east the salt flats waited in the autumn light, and he was, for the first time in his life, not walking toward an unknown destination but toward a known one. Her world, which was becoming his, the way a road becomes familiar, one step at a time, until you know every stone. By early autumn they came back over the mountains together, and the Ashwalker clan saw them arriving from the lookout post above Sureth Call, and by the time they reached the gate the news had traveled ahead of them. Rail was at the gate. Sira was at the gate. There were people lining the approach who wanted to see Zora Ashwalker come home with the human man she had claimed in midwinter and taken on the roads and brought back. Zora had her arm around his shoulders as they walked the last stretch. She did this sometimes, a gesture of warmth and also, he suspected, of the particular orc tendency to mark what was theirs, and he walked beside her with the warden medallion at his chest and his pack on his back and a year of mountain road in his legs, and he looked at the gate and the people and the amber stone of the Ashwalker settlement in the autumn light, and he thought, "This is where I live now." Not only. They were too much of the road for only. But here in the winters with Rail and her fire-building corrections and Sira's hand clasp and the quarters carved into the living rock, this was home. Zora tightened her arm around him as they reached the gate, and Rail stepped forward and looked at them with those precise amber eyes, and she said, in trade tongue so Noah would understand it, "You both look like you have been walking for 6 months. 5, Zora said. "Come inside," Rail said. "There is food." They went inside. The fire was burning deep in the rock, amber warmth through every opening, the smell of food and smoke, and the particular dry stone scent of the mountain itself. They set down their packs and sat at the Ashwalker table, and the family gathered around them, and there was food, and there was warmth, and there was the sound of people who are glad you have come home. Later, when the fire had burned lower and the settlement had quieted toward sleep, Noah and Zora sat together in the space at the edge of the rock face where they had stood the previous winter watching the rose-gold light on the peaks. She had her arm around him from behind again, her chin on his head, and he had his hands over hers where they crossed his chest. He said, "Next spring circuit, I was thinking the northern loop." "The northern loop has not been maintained," she said. 3 warden caches need complete restocking. Yes. The road through the Northern Territory is also clan-held for the first 40 miles. "Your word covers me," he said. She was quiet. He felt her chest expand and contract with a breath that held something in it, the sound of a woman who is, in whatever private way she allows herself, deeply content. She said, "My word covers you." He looked out at the mountains. The stars were coming up, hard and brilliant and cold. The same stars he had watched from 100 campsites on 100 roads, alone. He watched them now from the shelter of arms that could lift twice his weight and had learned to hold him with a gentleness that still, reliably, undid him. He said, "I want you to know, you chose me. I know you know that, I'm not reminding you of it. I just want you to know what that has meant. To be chosen by someone who could have gone anywhere and chose here, chose this, chose me." He stopped, started again. "I spent a long time being a person that things happened around. The cloister, the road, the resupply circuit. Good work, useful work, but at the edge, looking at other lives from the outside." He turned in her arms so he was facing her, looking up. "You moved me to the center of something, of your life, and I did not know how much I needed that until you did it." She looked at him for a long moment, amber eyes in the dark, and she reached up with her right hand and pressed her knuckles gently to his forehead. The same gesture as the waystation. The greeting, the recognition, the deliberate choosing of him as kin and worthy companion and more. She held them there. He felt, as he had the first time, the warmth of her knuckles against his skin and the absolute deliberate weight of the gesture. And he did not let his knees buckle this time because he had had a year of practice. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything, because some things are better carried in the body than in words. She lowered her hand. She kissed him, warm and unhurried, the way you do something you intend to do for the rest of your life and have no reason to rush. He kissed her back. Above them the mountain stars burned on.